The money that you save between the age of 20 and 30, which you then let compound over a number of decades after that, is the most valuable money that you'll ever save. I think that these lessons are lessons that most young people don't manage to learn, and they regret it in the future. And if somebody listening to this decides that they want to adopt these lessons and they want to start reading more, then you'll be setting yourself up for success for the rest of your life.
Hey, I'm Esther, and you are listening to On Your Own, the podcast for Jewish girls living away from home. Each week, we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you confidently navigate life on your own so you can achieve real growth and independence and take ownership of this foundational stage of your life. For additional resources, tips, and to stay up to date on future episodes, sign up for the On Your Own newsletter, linked below in the description. Looking forward to spending some time with you today. And now, to this week's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to On Your Own. My guest today is Nadav Ellinson. Nadav is a financial planner and educator who works with his clients to understand money and to grow wealth. In today's episode, we discuss the biggest mistakes young people make with money, why you should start investing as early as possible and how to do it, what to do if money is very limited right now, what to be careful of if you have an unlimited credit card from your parents, how to balance enjoying the moment while planning for the future, and much more. Okay, I don't even know if introducing this episode is going to do it any justice, because really all I can say is listen to this conversation and share it with your friends. Yes, that is how excited I am about my conversation with Nadav. Seriously. If you want to learn how to enjoy spending your money without guilt, how to budget your expenses, building a financial plan step by step, even if you're broke, how to learn good money habits, how investing works, and why you should start investing right now, the list goes on. If this is relevant to you, listen to this episode. To sum it up, this is all the financial advice I wish I had heard almost 10 years ago when I left home for the first time. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. Enjoy. Why have you decided that money is such an important topic to the point that you've dedicated your career to educating people on how to manage, save, and invest their money?
It's a great question. I think it took me a long time to get to this path. Through my career, I've done a number of different things, from working in the special needs field to working for 7 years in high tech. I think that the moment in which I realized that this is what I wanted to do, I was talking to a friend, and my friend asked me, "What is it that you enjoy doing in your spare time?" And it was a colleague from my old company, and together we realized that I had spent outside of my work time a lot of time building out financial models for friends and colleagues, teaching about how to file for taxes, and being able to take something that I was so passionate about and work out how to turn it into a career has been something that's really been rewarding for me. And I've discovered that it's a very unique way to be able to get to know a family very well, to build a personal relationship with them, understand the nuance of their life and their goals, and be able to help them build a plan to improve their life, sometimes in a small way, sometimes in a big way, and to have a measurable outcome. So for me, it's been very, very rewarding.
That's great. How did that end up happening, that you were building these things on the side if you were working in high tech? Like, how did that come about?
Yes, I mean, I was COO of the company, so I had a senior position and managed the finances. I had the role of CFO as well and managed payroll. And so firstly, there were many instances where employees had questions about their pension and about their savings. And so I was able to kind of go beyond a little bit and sit down one-on-one with employees and talk that through and help them understand what's going on. All employees in the company were encouraged to be able to bring something they were passionate about and present it to to their fellow colleagues. And so there are a number of instances where I prepared presentations and workshops on how to file your own taxes and get a tax deduction, on how to understand your employee options, the equity that's granted to you as part of working for a high-tech company, and what it means and how to get the most out of it. And so I built these workshops for my colleagues.
That's great. That's so cool. And it sounds like you were able to take that work and make it much more personal, working like with families and with individuals, and then you get to get the personal aspect there as well, which is great. So this podcast is for young people, specifically young women. So my first question in that area would be, what have you noticed is the biggest misconception that young people specifically have when it comes to the topic of money?
Yeah, it's a really important question because we all come into the field of financial management with our own conceptions and our own biases and what we've learned from our parents. I think that one common misconception is that young people believe that you have to take risk in order to earn money. And I've seen how that has negatively affected a lot of people as they build families and as they often take on more risk than they're able to handle. And that's sometimes in the form of debt. So people will take significant loans in order to be able to buy their house, in order to be able to go on vacations, in order to try to invest sometimes and build a lifestyle that they're interested in. And I think one of the important lessons there is that whereas maybe in business we take significant risk because we can afford to fail, we can afford to, we can declare bankruptcy and we can start again. With a family, that's not the case. And we want to make sure that we're making wise decisions in order to be able to be successful over time. And often that means not focusing on making money fast, but understanding that wealth is built slowly. And it's been shown in research throughout, history that if you're able to build some kind of strategy where you can save a little bit of money, maybe even, $500 a month, and you can invest that in something that isn't too risky, then you can build millions of dollars as you develop through life. So I think that's really important. Maybe one other misconception is, which has really grown over the past 5 years, is the whole concept of buy now, pay later. The concept that there are a lot of companies that have sprung up that work directly with retailers and allow you to buy something that you want right now and pay it in 4 or 5 installments over the next number of months. And it's caused a lot of people, especially young people, to buy things that they can't necessarily afford. And it's easy to justify because sometimes you're not even paying interest payments.
Oh, really?
If you can meet the deadlines on the ongoing payments. But it puts you in a mindset that is very dangerous. And here in Israel, it's built into the financial system, this concept of tashlumim, where you can walk into the supermarket and buy your groceries, but pay it off over the next 3 or 4 months. And when you start doing that, that's the moment that you often get into financial difficulty. And I've been able to see it time after time with families that today have 100,000 shekels of debt, 500,000 shekels of debt, sometimes a lot more than that. It often started from not quite being able to afford something and saying, I'll pay it off next month or the month after. And that whole concept of credit and buying now, paying later is probably one of the biggest misconceptions that people have and the most important behavior to avoid.
Wow. So I'm going to go back to risk first because that was very interesting. I do find that it's kind of in the nature of young people to want to take risks because we do have our whole life ahead of us. And so I guess the argument in that case would be, I'm young now. Like the older I get, the more tied down I'm going to get, the less opportunity for risk and to think big. So what would you say to someone who says that actually I see risk as integral to being young and having my whole life ahead of me?
Yeah. So it all depends on what kind of risk. So when I say don't take risk, I don't mean don't take risk. I mean you want to take risk that is that's appropriate. So, for example, if we talk about investing, when we save some money and we want to think about what to do with it, we've got a few different options. We can leave it in the bank, we can put it into a high yield savings account, or we can put it into the stock market. Right? There are lots of other options too, but let's start with those three. So, obviously, the one that feels like it's least risky is just to leave it in the bank. That's not what I'm encouraging you to do, because it's actually risky from another perspective. If you leave the money in the bank, then it loses value every year against inflation. And if that's the money you want to use to be able to fund your retirement in 50 years' time, then there's no way there's going to be enough. So what you're doing by taking what feels like the least risky option is you're actually taking the most risk, the risk of failure to meet your goal of being able to retire. As opposed to putting money in the stock market, which feels like the most risky option, it's actually probably the safest approach for young people who are looking to put away money to use in a number of decades. Because the stock market consistently, despite every time that it's crashed, consistently has recovered and has made significant returns. There's a fascinating statistic that there has never been in the history of the S&P 500, which is like an index representing the US stock market. There has never been a 15-year period, at least in the last 100 years, in which the market's gone down. It means if you're investing for a period of 15 years, based on everything we can see from history, there hasn't been an instance where you've lost money. And the expected outcome is significantly better than what you do by leaving the money in the bank. And so that, for example, is an element of risk, which once we understand it and we come to terms with how to match our goals to our investment strategy, we can take a certain amount of risk, but do it in a way that makes sense.
So the stock market, when I was living on my own, recently out of high school, was like this thing that people do when they get married. You know, they stop buying stocks and pension and retirement. Like I never ever thought of my retirement once until I got married and until I started taking like a job.
Yeah.
So what advantage would somebody who does start to think about these things, maybe coming out of high school, even maybe I have listeners in high school in dorms living on their own, why should they start thinking about these things now? What advantage might they have if they do?
Yeah. So I'll tell you some numbers, but I think it boils down to the fact that when you're in your teens, but let's say 20s, you have this superpower, and it's called time. And when you start saving for something in the future, it doesn't have to be retirement, right? It can be having enough money to be able to build out a family, maybe send them to private Jewish education. It might be being able to buy a house or an apartment in the future. When you're 20, as opposed to when you're 30, you are able to grow your money at an incredibly fast rate. So let me kind of walk you through what that looks like. Let's take someone who is saving $1,000 a month, for example. If they start when they're, and let's talk about retirement because we have a long period of time, and I've got the numbers here for retirement. So if they started when they're 60, they'd build up $100,000. Right? That's nowhere near enough.
If they start investing when they're 60 for retirement.
If they start putting aside $1,000 in an investment account every month when they're 60, then by the time they retire at, say, age 67, they'd have $100,000.
Okay.
If they start when they're 50, then they'll have $400,000. Wow. If they start when they're 40, they'll have $1 million. Right? We're talking about only putting aside $1,000 a month. If they start when they're 30, they'll have $2.7 million. Now, the next one's the most important one, right? Let's just make sure we know where we're at, right? We've saved for 37 years from age 30, and we've built up $2.7 million.
Whoa.
If we add just 10 years to that, and we start when we're 20, instead of when we're 30, instead of having $2.7 million, we'll have $6.2 million. That extra 10 years isn't just increasing it by 20% that we'd expect. It's much more than doubling
Wow.
the amount that you'll have at the end of the day. The money that you save between the age of 20 and 30, which you then let compound over a number of decades after that, is the most valuable money that you'll ever save.
And can you explain why that is, what this idea of compound is? How does that work?
Yeah. So compound interest, it's a concept that, like, if there's one concept that young people who are 20 years old should try to get their heads around, it's this idea of compound interest from two perspectives, both when we're investing and also when we're taking out debt and buying for something and paying for something later. So compound interest is the concept that if I invest today, I'm going to earn returns tomorrow. And then the day after, it's not just my original investment that is earning returns for me. It's my original investment plus the returns that I earn tomorrow. In other words, in the beginning, when you start investing, it starts growing slowly because you've got your $1,000 and you're going to make, let's say, 10% on that over a year. So you'll be able to have 1,100 the next year. The year after, it's not just the original 1,000 that's working for you. It's the 1,000 plus the 100 that you already earned. So the year after, instead of making $100, you'll make $110. And then you've got 1,210 to be able to work for you. Now, it starts slowly in the first 5-10 years, but if a lot of people have are familiar with these charts from COVID, right? Even though that was now a few years ago when we were all obsessed, but from COVID we had these exponential charts, right? They start relatively flat, and then they peak up, and they rise very, very quickly. And that's what happens with compound interest when you invest. In the first 10 years, it starts growing slowly. And then because you've built up this base of savings in your investment account, when it starts doubling, for example, every 10 years, it grows very, very quickly. So that's essentially the power of compounding. And if you want kind of a very general rule of thumb, if you invest for 10 years, you can double your money. If you invest for 20 years, you can multiply your money by 5. If you invest for 30 years, you can multiply it by 10. And if you invest for 40 years, you can multiply it by 25.
Wow. And this is all assuming that you keep your money inside, you don't pull it out.
Right, exactly. We can talk all about that, about behavior in investing, which is a whole really important topic, which maybe we need to talk about too. But if we can be consistent and leave the money in over those periods of time, then that's when we get real growth. And a lot of the wealthy people in the world, and a lot of the people that are able to pass down inheritances to their kids, they didn't necessarily, create a startup and sell it for $100 million, but they were maybe able to build up 10 or 20 or $30 million by consistent investing over 50 or 60 years.
Okay, so I'm going to step back to more of the mindset that would enable us to be this consistent and patient and have this self-control and this vision for the future. Because when you're young, you can only be young once, right? You only live once, and you can only have your youth once. So I feel like there's this constant push and pull of like wanting to invest in your future, but also wanting to take advantage and live in the moment. And so I feel like that comes very much to the front when it comes to money, because money can give us experiences now that we sometimes couldn't have later, but it can also compound in a way that it wouldn't later. So how do we balance being in the present with our money and also thinking about the future?
Yeah, it's probably the most important question when it comes to financial management and planning, and not just one that we deal with when we're young. We deal with it throughout our lives, because we always are struggling with the question of how much should I put aside for the future and how much should I spend now on myself or my kids or the things that I feel are important, whether it's fun or whether it's other things that are important to myself. So let me tell you a bit about how I would recommend if someone was sitting with me here, on a call or in a session, in a meeting, how I'd recommend for them to think about it, at least on a conceptual level. I think principle number one is pay yourself first. Pay yourself first. That means that when you get whether it's an income from a job or whether it is an amount of money that you're receiving from parents, or whether it's an amount of money that you're taking out of some kind of savings, you want to think about whether, before you even think about your spending and think about how much you have available for spending, it's worth determining whether you need to put money aside for future goals. So when you're earning an income, a very good rule of thumb is to put aside 15% of it for retirement. To kind of have that deduction before you even consider what your net income is, what the amount of money that you have that's left in your pocket. The other thing that a lot of people listening may want to be doing is putting aside money for charity. And you can think about that in exactly the same way, right? If you want to put aside maaser, so say 10% of the money that you're receiving, then that's also worth doing before you even consider how much you have left to be able to spend. Now, if there are people that are in seminary for the year and they're receiving money from their parents, they don't necessarily need to start saving for retirement right now. It's a discussion that maybe is worth having with your parents. I think the main value in considering it as an option is just building the right habits. And it's okay to say that the time to build those habits is when you're earning your own income. But it's also okay to say, I'm going to start now because I know the power of putting aside every dollar right now when I'm 18 or 20, as opposed to starting a number of years down the line. So that's the first thing that you want to think about and maybe have a discussion with the people that are around you. Then once we get past that, we want to try to understand where our money needs to go. So we'll start with the essentials. So how much do I need to pay for food? How much do I need to pay if you're paying for accommodation of any sort? How much do I need to pay for insurance, health insurance? Right? So you sit down and you can do it very simply. You don't need a complex template or necessarily use a budgeting app, although we can speak about that a little bit as we go. But you can just write down what are the fundamental things that you need to spend money on, and add all those up. Now, if you have money left after that, then you can already start thinking of spending it on your priorities, on the things that are fun to you. But by doing those first two steps first, of thinking about, is there any money that has to disappear before I see it? And then what are my essential expenses? It means that you won't get into any financial difficulty. And I think it's important to start from that, from those two steps, so that you can spend on everything else guilt-free. A lot of people spend on things they enjoy, but they agonize over it before they actually take out their credit card or take out their phone. And it's a pity, because when you have money available and you're able to spend it, then we want to enjoy spending on the things that bring us joy, that bring us happiness. And we can do that when we know that our fundamental needs are already met. So that's why I think that's the right direction to think about how to manage money that you have available.
So that when you're spending it, you're enjoying the spending process, but you're also doing the saving, and you're not torn in both directions and not actually being present or doing it properly in either way.
Yeah, and consistently I've seen the difference between somebody that enjoys spending and someone who doesn't. The person who enjoys spending knows that they have that money available to spend. They've done the planning, they've written up their basic spending plan, and they've said to themselves, I know I can afford to spend $300 a month, or $100 a month, however much is relevant to the budget of the people listening, on the things that I enjoy, and then they can spend it guilt-free. But when you haven't done that planning, especially if money is tight, you're always agonizing. You always have bills to pay. You're always unsure, whether you have money available, both for the essentials and for the luxuries.
You mentioned in that conversation, maybe of speaking to parents, if some of that money could go towards saving, even if it's not your own money, but it's your parents. You mentioned their habits. And I'm very curious, even if somebody is in a position where they are maybe very limited and they're only receiving money from their parents, it's going straight to their expenses right now. Or maybe somebody has a bit more flexibility, they have a side job. What are habits that are really important to start building when you're very young, so that you can, when you are making your own money, you can make sure that that you're also able to spend it in an enjoyable way and also save it responsibly?
Yeah, so I think that the habits of paying yourself first, so working out whether there's an amount that needs to be deducted for your future, creating a spending plan before you do anything else, and then finding a way to track what you're spending on. And tracking can come in two different forms. You can either you can do it manually, right? You can write down everything that you spend. And sometimes for young people where they don't have that many transactions, maybe they've got 30 transactions a month, that's very manageable. And some people enjoy doing it that way, whether it's pen and paper, whether it's Excel, whether it's something on their phone. So that's one method. Another method is to use an app. And if somebody is using, let's say, American credit cards, and most of their finances are based fundamentally in America, there are some great apps that are available in America. So, for example, there's one called YNAB, which builds really good habits around assigning every piece of income, giving every piece of income a job, giving every dollar a job, and then being able to track against that in an automated way. But there are lots of others. There was one called Mint, which is shutting down now.
Oh,
But
wow.
people can have a look at Empower, which is another free replacement that's very similar to Mint. So there are lots of good options coming out of America. There are some other good options in Israel, which are in Hebrew, and every country has their own budgeting apps as well. But that's kind of a second method where the app does most of the work for you. It connects to your credit card and bank account and helps categorize your spending. And the other method is called bank balance tracking, where you're able to set for yourself a certain target within your bank account, and you want to always be roughly around that target. So making sure that you can track the outcome by having a look at whether over time you're saving money. And if you're saving money and money is building up in your account, then you want to send it somewhere. Right? If you have excess, you don't want it to sit around in the bank because it's not doing anything for you there. So you can send it to a savings account, or you can send it to an investment account. And if the balance starts going down, then that can be a red flag for you to step back, to have a look again at your spending in a more detailed way, and adjust so that you're spending within your means. You're not spending more than you're able to bring in, whether that source of income is a side job or whether it's from your parents.
Very interesting. I'm going to take and maybe an even further step back and talk now to somebody who, hearing even $100 a month to put aside sounds absolutely crazy. Somebody who has very limited funds right now, whether because their parents are paying for their education and that's it, maybe they even have to pay towards their education or seminary experience, and they find that they have almost no spare money whatsoever. What do you think that a person in that situation should be aware of and mindful of if they find themselves in a situation like that?
Yeah. So it's really important to look at that kind of scenario because firstly, it's a little bit different, and it can be scary, and it can be stressful. And so we want to, just in terms of the principles first, we want to try to create a financial reality that reduces the stress and also reduces the risk. So the first step to that is thinking about an emergency fund. So thinking about what it'll take to have some money aside in case something goes wrong, right? For example, let's say you're funding your own, both education and expenses, and you're relying on a side job to be able to do that. So it could be the side job is paying you $500 a month and you're spending $500 a month. But if you were to lose that job or weren't able to work for a period of time, then you'd be in trouble. And so you want to create an emergency fund either before you come, or maybe you're able to work a little bit harder for a few months, or maybe parents are able to help with kind of setting up that buffer. An emergency fund is usually measured in a certain number of months of expenses. So in that example, if you're spending $500 a month, then you'd want to have something like somewhere between 3 and 6 months worth of savings to be able to fall back on in case there's a period of time when you can't work, or maybe you've got some unexpected expenses that come about. So that's something like $2,000 to $3,000 in that example that you'd ideally want to have, which is not assigned to any other goal other than being there in case there's an emergency which we can't expect, which we haven't been able to anticipate. So that's kind of step number one. And other than that, the same principles apply. We want to create a spending plan to make sure that we're spending within our means and spending less than we're bringing in. And also be okay with not saving in that scenario. We've spoken a lot about saving and investing and the importance of it. But if you can't save for a year or two and you start saving when you're 22, 23, 24, 25, then that is perfectly fine, right? It's 1,000 times better than the people that I work with that often start saving at 45 or 50. And so even if you've got an emergency fund and you're getting by on the income that you have, or the savings that you have, and you're not able to save further, then that's also a success. If you're able to save $10 a month and build those habits, and not just build habits, but build knowledge. So one of the values of starting to invest early with small amounts of money is that you can make mistakes, and the implications are minimal. So if you're able to take $10 a month and transfer it to an investment account, there are lots of different investment accounts available in America, right? Some of the best ones are robo-advisors like Wealthfront or Betterment, right? Those are two that people can look up. A robo-advisor allows you to put money in, even very small amounts of money, answer a number of questions on the platform, and they'll set up an investment portfolio for you, and they won't charge you very much for it. It can be very, very, very low cost. So even if you're putting $10 into that and you're starting to watch it grow, you're starting to read about it, because only once you do it do you start becoming interested in reading about investment and actually coming to terms with the terminology and the risk. Then that can both build good habits and build experience and knowledge, which will be invaluable when you start doing the same kind of thing with larger amounts.
That is fascinating. That's something I wish I knew, because I was always on a very limited budget. I left home at 15, and I got like a set amount. And if I'd known that with $10 I can actually start, I wouldn't have had to learn all the things that I'm learning now. And so I already would have had such a head start, even if it's just a small amount. Would that small amount ever actually add up to anything, or not really?
It would. I mean, firstly, every principle that I said before applies. So any money that you put aside right now, it'll double in 10 years and it'll be 5x in 20 years. So if you put $10 aside right now, then in 20 years, it'll be $50. Now, $50 doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're able to put $10 a month and you're putting $120 a year, then it adds up to something. Right. It can be a nice bonus in the future. But I certainly think that if we're talking about the $10 level, the real value is the habits, experience, and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody those people who are young today have a significant advantage over me, for example, who, I'm 34. I was 14 years ago. 14 years ago, it was much harder to do these things. Robo-advisors to the same kind of level that we're talking about today didn't exist. And it was only the very early days of being able to choose a cheap fund that did all the investment work for you and diversified your money across thousands of companies. Those kind of things only started to exist like 15 years ago. And so it's really another world today. And these things are much, much easier than they ever were before, and much easier than they were for your parents.
I want to get into like a little bit more details about the investing and like how do you do that practically. But I have one more question, which is taking my previous question to the opposite extreme. Somebody who is fortunate enough to have access to their parents' credit card and not really have any limits because thank God their parents are either just very generous or just very financially well off. What is something that they should be mindful, aware, careful about being in that situation?
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. It's very similar to the clients that I have who have many millions of dollars that they received from family, right? You can imagine a family that has $10 million in the bank, and they're trying to think about, and they're spending a lot every month, and they're trying to think about, should I cut down back on my spending? Should I spend within my means? Should I spend, the amount that I'm earning? And it's difficult to reduce spending in that circumstance because people become accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and to reduce that when you don't have to is something that's hard to justify for most. So if we talk about your specific question, somebody who has unlimited access to a credit card, it's very easy and natural to spend on any of their desires, right? Anything that they want. And I think that the best way to build the right habits in that scenario is to try to create a spending plan for yourself. I'm not saying spend, only $100 a month. You can create a spending plan that is potentially quite broad and include quite a lot of the things that are important to you and which you enjoy. But if you can learn the skills of being able to build a budget and keep to it, even when you don't have to, then that's going to set you up for life. If you take the opposite track and just pull out the card and spend whenever you feel like it, then you're harming yourself in two ways. Number one is not learning the habits, which I mentioned before. And number two is lifestyle creep. So the concept of lifestyle creep is that as life progresses and we have more money available, we generally spend it and we get used to a new lifestyle. And pulling back from that is extremely difficult. Right? If you have gotten used to living in a large house or having 2 fancy cars or being able to order in or go out to eat every night, stopping to do that feels very painful. And for somebody who has unlimited access to a credit card, if you get used to that lifestyle, right, on your year away or your year in seminary, and then you get home and you have to start living according to maybe your income or your salary, it can be difficult. And often that is a scenario that leads to debt because you start borrowing in order to maintain the lifestyle that you got used to. So there's a lot of nuance there and a lot to think through. But I would very much encourage anyone in that situation to force themselves to build a spending plan and to try to stick to it, even if it's spending a lot more money than you would have if you were relying on your own funds.
Wow.
And maybe one more tip: you could think about going to your parents and telling them, "I really appreciate you giving me an unlimited credit card, but maybe give me a limit," right? And it would be a very mature thing to do, perhaps a difficult thing to do, but something that is worth thinking about.
It's reminding me that there's a halacha that if someone lost their money, you have to give them charity, and help them build them up based on what they were used to before, because it's just a totally different experience having to lower your standards to whatever those standards were, even if they were, let's say, unreasonable. So that's definitely very helpful. Okay, so somebody who's inspired by this to start actually saving and investing, you've mentioned that there are more ways than ever today to be able to do that and a lot of help online. Where would you recommend that they start?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on where people are coming from. Are most of the listeners coming from America?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of them are in Israel now, but
Yeah,
they're American. Yeah.
cool. So for those people who are in Israel right now and planning to go back to America and planning to, likely live in America, then you want to use American platforms. And the easiest ones to start from are the robo advisors that I mentioned earlier. A robo advisor essentially is a computer. It's a software platform. It's a website which allows you to deposit money, and then they'll walk you through a program and they'll ask you questions about your risk and about what this money is for. And then based on your answers, they'll automatically invest the money for you. And the fees there are reasonable, 0.2, 0.3% of your money, which is a very small amount. And so if you go to the website Betterment, that's one of them. Let's make sure that I'm getting these right. Yeah, so Betterment, BETTERMENT.com is one of the larger ones and the well-known ones. Another one is called Wealthfront. So Wealthfront should be hopefully easy to spell, which is also a robo-advisor that allows you to do this kind of thing. There are lots of other ways to do it as well. There are lots of different brokerage accounts and different accounts that will allow you to invest in different ways. But the advantage of looking up the concept of robo-advisor, and there are other ones too, other robo-advisors that you can check out, is that they really do the work for you. So once you put the money in, there are two ways that you can kind of invest. You can either, if you have a lump sum sitting in your bank that you don't need, which you don't need for the next 10 years plus, then you can deposit it into the account, answer the questions, they'll invest it for you. After that, you don't have to do anything. There is a lot of research showing that people who ignore their investment account, once it's invested in a well-diversified portfolio that has some automation to it, often do a lot better than those who log in and check the balance every day. And that relates to a concept called loss aversion. So when we're investing, sometimes the market goes up and we make money, and sometimes the market goes down and we lose money. But psychologically, the times that it goes down hurt us mentally a lot more than when the market is going up. We pay a lot more attention when we're losing money, when the market's going down. And because both happen, if we have a look regularly, we'll see gains and we'll see losses, but we'll focus on the losses and it'll be a negative experience for us. And in many cases, that will cause us to sell and to move the money out of the investment.
Mm-hmm.
And so the research shows that if we can invest and we can leave it and not look at it regularly and come back and look at it in 10 years, we'll get usually the best outcome.
That's awesome. And that answers my question, which was, what's the best way to be able to leave the money in without finding this reason or that to pull it out? And what is something that someone can have in mind? You've mentioned a lot, but if they're in a situation and they really want something really badly, which happens a lot when you're young, something becomes like the most important thing in the world, and you don't have the cash on you, but you have money in an investment. What could be something they could tell themselves to stop themselves from going and just grabbing it out? Because it is, at the end of the day, it's their money and it is accessible.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I don't know if I have the best answer because it's tricky, right? And investments in the stock market, it's important for people to realize this as well, they're liquid in the sense that it's accessible and you can take it out. Right. I think there are two things that are worth keeping front of mind in order to try to convince yourself that it's worth sticking to it and worth keeping to your plan. One is maybe numbers based, and one is like trying to visualize the future. So let's start from the numbers, right? If we can remember the fact that that whatever money is sitting there, let's say the $1,000 that you want to use to buy a new phone, that today that's $1,000 and I'll give you a new phone. But in a number of years' time, it's going to be $10,000, and it's going to help you buy a lot more. I think that's something that can help a certain portion of people. I think the other thing that can be valuable is bringing to mind and actually visualizing what life looks like in 20 or 30 years' time when you have money saved up and when you don't have money saved up. It's the difference between perhaps renting for your whole life and being worried about bills and not being able to go on vacation and not being able to give money to kids to help them, buy property or set themselves up for life, versus being able to achieve all of those things. And I think sitting down and imagining those two lives can be very helpful. One more very practical tip is delaying. So if there's something that you really want today, it might feel like it's the most important thing in the world. But a good rule of thumb is to say to yourself, I know I want this thing. I'm probably going to buy it, but I'm not going to buy it for the next 7 days. And then over those 7 days, thinking about whether it's important to you, whether it's something you still want to buy. And when you get to the end of that period that you defined, however many days it is, then asking yourself again, is this important to me? Because often we have impulse spending, and after buying it, we realize we didn't really need it. And being able to get past that psychological urge sometimes is helpful in realizing at the end of the day that we can do more important things with that money.
That is really helpful. Also, just the way that things are marketed to us, it's usually marketed in a very urgent way. Like if you don't get the sale today, you're losing out, and it's usually instills within us this urgency to be able to get over that. That's huge.
Yeah, which is a really important point, because the whole marketing industry is designed to beat us, to overcome our sensibilities, and it often works. And so being able to just slow down, to often ignore sales, right? Unless it's something that you know you need, a sale should not be a reason to buy something. And introducing that delaying tactic into your repertoire can be helpful.
What is the biggest regret that you've heard from your clients when it comes to money?
The biggest regret by far is what I've been talking about, the whole time, which is I regret that I didn't start earlier. And that's for two reasons, which we've also spoken about. Number one, if I started earlier, I'd have a lot more money sitting around today.
Right.
And number two, if I started earlier, which you were saying before, I would have gained experience, made my mistakes, and understood much better how to do things and how to manage. So the earlier you can start, which if there's one take home that I want everyone to walk away with from the podcast, is that even if you're not forced by circumstance to create an emergency fund and to try to track your spending and to create a spending plan and to start investing, if you can do all of those four things, then your future self will thank you. I think that's regret number one by far. Regret number two, I think, comes from people who used debt early. In other words, they took out loans to be able to try to live the way they wanted to live. And when you take out debt, you're not borrowing from the bank. You're borrowing from your future self. Any debt you take out today is debt you're going to have to repay in the future. And you don't repay it one-to-one, you repay it with a lot of interest. And the best way to be kind to your future self is to live life without debt. Mortgage, maybe for a house, is another topic to talk about, but most other forms of debt should be avoided as much as possible.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would want to add to what you've just said?
I think that these lessons are lessons that most young people don't manage to learn. and they regret it in the future. And if somebody listening to this decides that they want to adopt these lessons and they want to start reading more and they want to find a few podcasts about personal finance that they can learn from, then you'll be setting yourself up for success for the rest of your life. And it comes in small steps, just like growing wealth comes in small steps. Building knowledge also is built step by step. And if you can learn something about finance every month, then you'll look back in 5 years and suddenly the things that you didn't understand or that confused you are obvious, are just part of your knowledge set. And I'd encourage everyone to really try to spend some time to learn.
Wow. Thank you, Nadav, for this. I want to send this right now to every single person I know, not even necessarily those who are just very young, because I feel like this is some of this information. I think there are people in their 40s and 50s, maybe even 60s who would do well to hear it. Thank you very, very much for giving this time. And yeah, I really hope that people can take a huge amount away from this, because you've given so much. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. And I'll just mention that I've spoken mostly about kind of the American context, but most of the work that I do day to day is the Israeli context. And so if there's anybody who is planning to move to Israel or live in Israel ultimately, then you can check out our website, bluewhitefinance.com. And we have a lot of free resources and articles there on managing finance in Israel and moving to Israel and Aliyah. And we've got an Ole budgeting calculator, which we built together with Nefesh B'Nefesh. There's a lot of different resources that can be really relevant for those people who are listening who are considering life in Israel.
That's huge. I'll definitely link that below. So thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of On Your Own. If you like this episode or think it will be useful to someone else, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I would love to connect with you. If you've got any questions, feedback, or ideas for future episodes, you can email me at onyourownpodcast@gmail.com. See you next week. And in the meantime, happy adulting.